Texting them. Let's kick off, because we've got an hour and a half. I'll probably talk for about 45, 50 minutes. I'll try and keep it high energy and enthusiastic, and we can go on a bit of an adventure, because what I want to talk to you about this morning is a new narrative for humanity. So, yeah, fairly lofty ambition, and we'll see how we get on with this. You have to apologize, or I have to apologize. I'm a bit stiff today. I put my back out on Friday riding this thing. Now, this is the future of electric bicycles. I called it the Tesla bike. It's the next generation of electric bike, and the motor is in the hub of the wheel. So you can't actually see it at all. Of course, it is brilliantly German engineered. This thing goes up to 45 kilometers an hour on speed assist. It's absolutely terrifying, but also kind of brilliant. It's the first time I've experienced the electric smile on two wheels. So this is a little snapshot of the future. So if I'm walking in a funny way, it's because my back is a little bit out of joint. And the future is really divisive. The future can either make us scared, a lot of people fear the future, or the future can be exciting and empowering and dynamic. And I think it's often quite binary. And often, because we're here talking about education, I think education is instrumental in how we view the future. If you are in possession of the facts and the insights and the innovations, and you know what is potentially coming down the line, a bit like me, you're an eternal optimist, because you can see all the solutions out there. You can imagine them in your mind's eye. You can believe that a better world is possible and that we can make it happen. If you are not in possession of those facts and insights, then you fear the future. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like a threat. It feels like the unknown and the unknowable, where your job is under threat. You know, your family security is in doubt. So the thing is, the future is already out there. You know, like that little Tesla bike, it's just not evenly distributed, as William Gibson, the sci-fi writer, said. And, you know, last week we had the anniversary of Back to the Future, the date when Marty McFly went to in Back to the Future, which makes people like Chris and I feel really old. Someone sat down with us at dinner last night and said, "You guys aren't students." It's like, well spotted. And the challenge with the future is we always extrapolate from where we are now. We like to think of it as an incremental set of changes, which is why we still don't have our hoverboards. We haven't got the radical innovation that we might have anticipated years ago. Plus, you should never listen to experts when they talk about the future, because as the work of Professor Philip E. Tetlock pointed out, actually expert predictions are only slightly worse than algorithms. He analyzed about 35,000 different expert predictions and found that they were no better than a whole bunch of chimpanzees banging away on typewriters. You'll also be aware that this example, you know, is when if we have an infinite number of monkeys or chimpanzees and an infinite number of typewriters, then eventually one of them will write the complete works of Shakespeare, or the entire contents of the Daily Mail online, which is probably not quite the same contribution to human cultural history. I'm a mentalist. I'm an environmentalist, and I've been working in sustainability now for almost 20 years, running Futerra for the last 15. The old joke I always say was when I first started working in sustainability, it was a bit like wetting yourself whilst wearing a dark suit. No one noticed, but it gave you a warm feeling inside. Now we say that working on sustainability is a bit like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. Very few people actually are, and those that are doing it quite badly. These are old jokes, but I'm an environmentalist, so I recycle them, obviously, over and over again. I started out my career as a marine biologist. I worked all over the world. I worked on reef fisheries in Australia. I worked on prawn fisheries, hence the prawns on the fingers. And I realized, actually, quite early on in my fisheries career, that I was going to end up spending my whole life saying, if you don't stop catching all the fish, there won't be any fish. And fisheries was actually a very inspirational moment for me, because you realized you had this potentially sustainable, wonderful natural resource that we were squandering and that we were destroying. This is a photo I took on Tsukiji Fish Market in Tokyo, at the tuna auction. These are some of the most expensive fish in the world. They're now being stockpiled in frozen warehouses for when they become extinct. The last bluefin tuna are currently fetching hundreds of thousands of dollars each. So it's an incentive for every ship to fish out the last fish, because one fish can make a whole crew rich. That is how we have commoditized and economized some of the most beautiful creatures on the planet. But Futerra's mission, when we started out 15 years ago, is to make sustainability so desirable it becomes normal. And that's with the belief that people will run towards positive, aspirational, compelling visions of an attainable future with more energy and stamina than they'll run away from threats of doom and gloom and Armageddon. And we have our own theory of change, which basically follows 4 different areas. We need to have a vision. You need to know where you're going. Or more importantly, you need to know where you have to go in order to change. You need to have the maps, the strong action plans, the processes, the route maps is going to take you to your destination. You need to have the symbols, the strong brand that people can identify with and connect to. And of course, you need the stories which touch people emotionally. And it's only with this combination of logic and magic that you can unlock the potential for sustainability. And if you want to put it a bit more snappily, we talk about imagining better. Imagine better. This is our provocation to all of our clients. If you want to change the world, first you've got to imagine a better one. You've got to see it in a different way. And we have, I'm paraphrasing this, if you want to subvert the dominant paradigm, you have to have more fun than they are and let them know while you're doing it. And that's about embodying this kind of sense of desirable sustainability. This is my team on company away days last year in the Swedish archipelago. This is on our fancy dress night. This is actually on our let's all dress in white night, although this makes us look a little bit like a cult. It looks like we're about to kind of be beamed up to the spaceship and taken off to another dimension. We work with all sorts of large organizations, and you'll recognize some of the logos there, big corporations, large bodies like the United Nations, campaigning organizations like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. We have 5 offices globally: London, Stockholm, New York, San Francisco, and now Mexico, although we work on every continent. There's the handsome bunch that are the team. And all of our work is led by what we call thought leadership publications. And I'll talk about 1 or 2 of these probably, but they're all free to download from our website, so do help yourselves. And they've had over 1 million downloads, or literally downloaded millions of times, because we give all this stuff away for free because we think it works. So just a couple of examples of our work before I get stuck in to the main talk. Mondelez, one of the world's largest coffee companies, came to us. They said we have a big problem with coffee growers leaving the coffee growing industry in Latin America. So we created this big idea for them about creating 1 million coffee entrepreneurs, and this idea of coffee made happy, which connects the drinker of the coffee cup with the producer of the coffee in Latin America. It's all about raising welfare standards, education, and engagement in coffee farming in those countries. And then it's now gone on to pack, and it's being manifested in campaigns like Coffee versus Gangs, taking people out of the gang culture in Latin America and getting them back into coffee farming. One of our biggest campaigns is Fashion Revolution Day, where we partner with a number of different organizations to challenge the worker conditions in fashion around the world. This happens on April the 24th, I think, every year. It's now one of the world's biggest ethical fashion campaigns, trying to get companies to answer the question, who made my clothes and in what conditions, and to try and get them to improve it. And last but by no means least, we've done coffee, we've done fashion, this is beer. We helped SAB Miller, second biggest brewery in the world, now bought by the biggest brewery. So we'll see how this pans out. But this is the idea that they as a business can only prosper when the communities in which they operate prosper. So that's just a kind of little flavor of some of our work. But today what I really want to talk about is storytelling. Dogs sniff bottoms, we tell stories. They are the way that we make sense of the world around us. They're the way that we interact with each other, the way that we understand our relationships with each other and with the wider planet. And as the author of his Dark Materials, Philip Pullman, says, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. They are our most powerful organizing framework. They are part of the library of humanity. They are the way that we navigate uncertainty. And some of our stories are having challenges now because when you see how these fit in, you have the kind of the hierarchy of needs, which used to be physiological safety, belonging, self-identity, and now, of course, it's all underpinned by Wi-Fi, and nothing can happen without the Wi-Fi. But the reason stories are powerful is like this goes back to us gathered around our campfires 75,000 years ago as we moved out of Africa. And every culture holds storytelling in high esteem because of its ability to help us navigate difficult waters. And the example I love to use here is the example of the story of the Rainbow Nation that Nelson Mandela crafted in post-apartheid South Africa, where everyone thought there was a risk of the country descending into civil war, and you needed a new narrative, a narrative which you would unite people and build a bridge to the better future that they needed. In many ways, very successful. This is one of my icons and my heroes, Buckminster Fuller. I'm sure you're aware of him. If you're not, please go and do some research on him. A real visionary, but he tells us the story that actually we have the ability now, in this generation, to feed, clothe, and look after every single person on the planet. Up to 9 billion people, actually. But whether we choose to do so is a touch-and-go relay race between utopia and oblivion right up until the final moment. Everything is held in balance. And it's up to us. We have to consciously make the choice to deliver this future which is possible. And he was saying this in the 50s. He talked about spaceship Earth, this planet zooming along through space, and unfortunately, we don't have the operating instructions. It's our task, if you like, to work out what the operating instructions are and to operate Earth properly. Because at the minute, our narrative and our story is actually predicated on austerity, certainly in Europe at the moment, but increasingly globally. And I think this is the worst narrative we could possibly imagine. It's dispiriting, it's demotivating, it's depressing. It actually disconnects us from the task in hand. It disconnects us from the challenge that we must engage with. And I'm going to use the story of energy a little bit to kind of challenge some of our expectations and perspectives around this. Because if you go back 200 years, this is what energy looked like in Europe. It was basically donkeys and cattle. Everyone had a donkey or a cow. They may have had access to a water mill, but this was our European energy system. And actually, increasingly, all over the world, you would have seen something very, very similar. So that in 200 years, it's changed quite radically, I think you'll agree. And the reason I'm saying this is because we have to ask ourselves fundamentally where we are. Now, you all know this image, which is the iconic Earthrise over the surface of the moon. It's the first picture of the Earth from the surface of another celestial body. It's called Earthrise. It was taken by Apollo mission in 1968. This, I think, is more profound. This is actually taken in 2004 by the Spirit rover, and it's the first picture of the Earth from the surface of another planet. This is Earth taken from the surface of Mars. And it changes the context and asks us fundamentally, where are we now? Because, as George Clooney so rightly pointed out in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, we're in a tight spot. We're in a really tight spot. The reason you're all sitting here is because you know we're in a tight spot. And our challenge, if you like, is to try and get our heads around what we do about this. One of the most disturbing sets of graphs, or actually inspiring sets of graphs, depending on how you look at it, is this by Will Steffen, The Great Acceleration. And what you see, actually, doesn't matter whether you're talking about primary energy use or world population in the top left-hand corner or global surface temperature, everything changes around this dotted line on every graph. That dotted line is 1950. So you can see, actually, the trashing of the planet has happened quite successfully in just the last 65 years. Now, most people go, oh, God, that's a bit depressing. I actually think it's really inspiring because it shows us that even as things are unraveling, once we know what is going wrong, we have a chance of fixing it. And it's only by acknowledging this and being open to it that we actually understand what the solutions might be. And so we've trashed it in 65 short years, but I think we have an opportunity to turn it around and go in the opposite direction. And it's also worth remembering where we are in time. So we are just at the end here of what we call the Holocene, which, if you look, this is a graph of temperature fluctuation. And what you see is actually the last 10,000 years has been a remarkably stable period of temperature. And this is when most modern civilizations have emerged, when we invented things like agriculture. And it was very volatile before that. And actually, at some points on this graph, there were only a few thousand human beings left on the planet. We've already been to the edge, and we came back. And the thing is, we're about to tip ourselves potentially into another period of climatic volatility, which is going to be challenging. So this is the Anthropocene. You've probably heard this phrase before, but it's where we are now the driving force of the fate of life on Earth. It's up to us about how we manage this and how we go on this journey going forward. And it's worth checking in that it's not going very well right now. We lost 50% of our vertebrate biomass. That's all our animals with backbones in the last 40 years. I'm 43 years old, so that's happened in my lifetime. Half of our animals with backbones, half of that biomass. That's pretty destructive. Worse, in ecology, we talk about shifting baseline syndrome. So we lost 50% of what we had left 40 years ago, but that was from an already depleted baseline. So the fecundity and fertility and bounty of nature that we understand to be real is actually already an impoverished version of what it could be, of what it should be, of what it can be. Plus, we're on course for probably 10 billion people, perhaps, as we go past mid-century. I don't buy into this sort of Malthusian discussion of Stephen Emmett, the computer biologist who wrote a play called 10 Billion, and asked what his advice to his children was going to be. He said, I'm going to teach them how to use a gun. I don't buy into that, because I think, as will hopefully become clear, that all of this is avoidable if we do the right things. Because we can already feed everyone. We can already feed 9 billion people. But we don't because of this. Almost half the food we produce never gets to a human stomach. We waste nearly 2 billion tons of food a year. It's insane. We don't have a food problem. We have a food production and a food distribution problem. We produce the wrong things in the wrong places, and we don't get them to the people who need them. We're on a wrong trajectory here. Whilst this is some data from the UK, but whilst our consumer spending has gone up and our GDP, our gross domestic product, has gone up, we haven't actually got any happier. So you have to ask yourself the fundamental question: if this is what is chewing through the planet's resources at a rate of knots, and it's not making us any happier, what the hell are we doing? What the hell are we playing at? And we are also in the urbanizing century. More people will move to cities in this century than they have done in all of human history. Over half of us already live in cities. This is that we're going to become familiar with what John Thackeray, the design guru, calls the desert of the real, whereby you can be surrounded by relative abundance and plenty, but be fundamentally disconnected from the natural systems that truly sustain us. So, understanding that milk doesn't just come from the supermarket, understanding where our food and where those ecosystem services actually play out. Of course, it doesn't help when the overarching narrative from most advertising is to get out there and shop, damn it, shop. If you want to put it slightly more colloquially, buy more shit or we're all fucked. And this is the basis of the kind of materialist consumer economy that we currently live in. So obviously we have to try and challenge this because it's not delivering happiness, it's not delivering well-being, and it's trashing the world around us. As the guy says in Fight Club, we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like, who largely don't care. This is the sort of the madness and insanity that we find ourselves in. My favorite example of this type of cognitive dissonance, this is an advert from Tesco's in the UK: buy a low-energy light bulb and win air miles. Perhaps the most conflicted piece of environmental communication in recent times. So, whoa. Oh, there's the whole presentation. I don't know what happened there. Let's try and go back a little bit. You know what's coming now. There we go. I think it's my natural magnetic personality playing with the signal. So this is a fog of concern. This is why people are confused, because they actually have what psychologists call the finite pool of worry. There are only so many things we can deal with in our heads at any one time. And what is close in terms of time and close in terms of space takes priority. So actually, environmental issues don't actually get much space because they tend to be longer term, slow burn, and less of an immediate impact. And the world is incredibly complicated now. We're living in a world of interdependence and interconnectedness which is unprecedented. Everything is linked, and even the Pentagon starts to talk about this now. They describe a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. You know, this is the VUCA world that is coming. And you know when the Pentagon starts talking about this stuff, that this shit just got real. If you want to look at some of the most challenging reports on climate change, go and look at the published reports on the Pentagon website about climate security, climate refugees, climate warfare, because they are planning the scenarios for this stuff, you know, because these scenarios are real. So in many senses, we are still in denial. You know, we are fundamentally in denial because denial is a very attractive place to be. I'm sure you've all heard this from your friends, from your families. Denial is great, because if you deny the challenge, you don't have to change. And again, psychologists will describe this as disavowal. It's not my fault. Projection. It's someone else's fault. It's China's fault. It's India's fault. Or regression. It's such a big, urgent, huge, scary problem. Someone else must be sorting this out for me, right? And those three forms of denial mean that you don't change. And we talk about this as the bystander effect, which says if you fall over and hurt yourself in the street, you better hope there's only one person there to help you. Because if there's only one person there, they'll step in and go, oh, he's fallen over in the street, I'll go and give him a hand. If there's a whole crowd, everyone looks at each other nervously and goes, oh no, he's fallen over in the street, I really hope someone else goes and helps him. And our challenges at the moment are suffering from the biggest bystander effect, where everyone is saying, this is such a huge, big, scary, urgent challenge, someone else must be doing something about it, right? And that's not, because that's every single one of us, individually and collectively, coming together to tackle these challenges. Equally, it's not about, you know, taking yourself out of the equation. You know, a lot of environmentalists go, oh, just remove yourself from the system. The environmental architect Michael Pauling tells a lovely joke of two planets walking along through space, and one starts itching and scratching and looking really uncomfortable, and the second one says, what's wrong? And the first one goes, I've got a terrible case of Homo sapiens. And the second one says, don't worry, be gone soon. You know, this is actually about saving us. You know, the planet's going to be fine. It's been here 4.5 billion years. It'll be here long after we're gone. You know, this is actually about saving our collective asses. So the next time someone says, oh, you stupid tree hugger, it's like, well, the trees are going to be fine. You know, it's us who are fucked. And it's this understanding also about the kind of the significance of this illusion of separation, that somehow we are separate from each other, and we are separate from the infinitely complex web of life which sustains us. You know, we can blame Descartes for this, you know, and this Cartesian separation of mind, body, spirit, and people from the animal world, and the animal world from the plant world. This is a cognitive and optical delusion. Everything is infinitely connected in increasingly intricate and complicated ways. And we are just finding now that our science is catching up with where our hearts and our guts have been, where we know how this stuff is connected. We felt it, and now we're starting to be able to prove it. Because it's this illusion of separation which allows us to treat other people as resources to be exploited, which allows us to treat the natural world as resources to be exploited in a utilitarian fashion. The rest of the world is not resources, it's family, you know, and it's working with that family, which is powerful. Because this is where we're going at the moment. And cities can also be the fountain of sustainability. I mean, it's often much more efficient to live in a city. It can actually have a much lower impact, but we have to be conscious about the way we're doing this, about the way we're engineering it. Because at the minute, we're self-obsessed. You know, the phenomenon of the selfie and the selfie stick. I noticed in London the other day, they had the World Selfie Championships. Made me want to shoot myself in the head. Because part of the problem is we've got to eat our own ego. You know, we've got to take a step back from this and not dwell in our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, but actually to realize cognitively, spiritually, emotionally, we are all connected. And the selfie stick is not going to help because there is a plan. And this is where it gets fun, because this is where we can do stuff. This is where the call to action kicks in. This is where the education matters. Because if you look at the work of Kate Raworth from Oxfam, she describes what you might call the safe donut for humanity. And what that is that's living within these 9 planetary boundaries. So we have climate change, we have land use change, ocean acidification, built on a strong social foundation. where people have access to food, water, and the basic resources, the healthcare that they need. Within that, we can live well, and we can live with 9 billion of us in a sustainable fashion, in a beautiful fashion, on a planet which is not denuded and trashed in our name. That said, not all going according to plan right now. We've got the big Paris conference coming up in December on climate. Currently, I'm on course somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees. So our response to climate change is like turning up to an earthquake with a dustpan and brush. And we're not telling this story very well. We talk about this as storytelling, but it's the most challenging and biggest story that we've never successfully told or engaged people in. And the minute we're doing exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. We remember Deepwater Horizon, the BP oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Although Shell has just pulled out of the Arctic, which was quite comedic for about 18 months, as they kept saying how safe it was, as rigs like this ran aground the first time there was a big storm. Shell have actually squandered over $5 billion experimenting in the Arctic for exactly zero payback. That doesn't even make economic sense. We have the tar sands in Canada, and this gets to the stage where you're all familiar with the nursery rhyme, aren't you? There was an old lady who swallowed the fly. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly, the bird to catch the spider, the cat to catch the bird, and so on and so forth. And on energy, but that's what we're kind of doing at the moment. Madness, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Einstein said something similar. He said, you don't solve your problems with the same approaches which created them. We are basically trying to swallow a fly at the moment and going down that direction. It's not like we don't have the evidence. If you're familiar with the work of Carbon Tracker on unburnable carbon, what you find is if you want to limit global climate change to 2 degrees, there is a certain amount of carbon you can afford to burn. On the UK Stock Exchange alone, there was 5 times more carbon listed as economic assets on the stock exchange that we can actually burn. 5 times more. Who's in denial? And this is scary because actually what you find is about £1 in every 5 invested in a UK pension fund comes from oil industry revenues. So everyone sups with the devil. Some of us just use a very long spoon. We are all in bed with this, and which is why the collective change has to be done together. Bishop Tutu talking about this is the apartheid movement. Divestment has the same moral case, getting out of fossil fuels. Even this radical left-wing environmentalist, the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has said that most fossil fuel reserves can't be burned. This is a movement now, which has momentum. Bloomberg Businessweek, again, an anarchist publication saying it's global warming stupid. You're starting to see a real transition happening. This is great because it means we are in flux. We actually have a chance to influence the way that this agenda pans out because we have the potential to be in a world of energy abundance. Because climate change is a wicked problem because it's unprecedented. We've never experienced anything like this in human history. It's also connected with lifestyles. We cause it individually. And there is no right or wrong solution, which is where actually the fertile debate should be. Rather than arguing till the cows come home about the science, let's have a much more colourful debate about what we might do about it. Even environmentalists don't like talking about this. I gave up flying on holiday 11 years ago, and flying is still a very divisive thing. A friend of mine, Maya Hillman, who's a long-term environmental activist, said he was at a dinner with a whole bunch of environmentalists, and they're all sat around, and they're all retired, and they're all talking about their holidays, and about where they were flying off on holiday to next. And Maya, being Maya, said, this is a bit weird. You guys have spent your whole lives working on climate change, and now you're talking about where you're twanging to next on a plane. And he said there was this enormous, awkward silence. And then someone said, isn't this a delicious spinach tart? And we don't want to talk about it because we know we're wrong. Again, it's the denial. So there's a huge elephant in the room around all of these issues. A massive, great, multicolored, techno, bright elephant, which we tend to avoid talking about. And that's part of the problem because this does actually begin to change everything. As Naomi Klein's new book suggests, and the film of the book is out now, it does change everything. It does fundamentally challenge some of the preconceits that underpin a lot of the way we run the system now. But I believe, and I think a lot of us believe, that it's not a choice between fixing the economy and fixing the environment. If you think you can't fix the economy and fix the environment and society at the same time, then you have a very tiny mind. This is the most exciting, innovative, dynamic game in town. This is the stuff where you make the change. This is the stuff which is the future. And we like to think of progress as being linear. That we come down from the trees and we kind of become inherently civilized and we end up planting trees. But the truth is, actually, progress goes back and forth. It peaks and troughs. It ebbs and flows. It can actually go backwards. And we talk about this as progress traps, because a progress trap is where our pursuit of progress creates circumstances which then undermine our potential for future progress. So the world around us as we enjoy it now, moving on from our cow and horse-based energy system, our world is based on fossil fuels. We have had 200 years of post-industrial revolution development, which has been based on that cheap, available, abundant energy of fossil fuels. It's amazing. It's allowed us to build this incredible world. But the circumstances have now changed, because our pursuit of cheap, available, abundant energy through fossil fuels has created the carbon emissions which are causing climate change, which are now threatening future progress. So we don't denigrate and dismiss that fossil fuel history. We celebrate it, and we draw a line underneath it, and we say, now it's time to do things differently. Now it's time to embrace the renewable energy revolution. Now it's time for a new future. Because as environmentalists, we're not blindly opposed to progress, but we are opposed to blind progress. And in that sense, our progress, if not blind, is at least partially sighted. It's not seeing things clearly. It's not seeing the dangers which are coming in inherent. But there are four laws, which I'm just going to take you briefly through, which I think are going to radically change the world as we know it and the way it functions. So you might be familiar with some of these. So Metcalfe's law is the first one. What Metcalfe's law says is the value of a telecommunications network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users of the system. So this comes back to the early days of the telephone. But what's fascinating, this is on the left here we have a map of the internet. On the right we have a map of the connections in the human brain. Spookily similar. Who would have thunk it? And we are now at an unprecedented time in history where we are going to have everyone connected for the first time in 100,000 years of modern human history. At the minute, there was around 3 to 3.5 billion of us online. By 2020, we will have 5 billion of us online. By 2025, everyone. Next 10 years, every single one of us connected. I really hope we are not just sending each other selfies by 2025. That would be a really depressing manifestation of our chance to actually craft an integrated, collective, shared human story for the 21st century. But it's going to happen. So the power of this network, everyone is going to be online, and it's going to be amazing. You're already starting to see the first manifestations of this in energy. Good Energy is one of the biggest renewable energy companies in the UK. They have combined with an open data platform called Open Utility to create what we call Picklo. Picklo is like an eBay for energy. You will be able to buy live, in real time, energy from your supplier of choice. So if you want to buy energy from the solar panels on top of your local school, you'll be able to. So this is democratic, live, fluid markets in energy. So it's going to enable people to make informed and enlightened choices about where their power comes from. And we're already seeing, all across Germany, municipalities retaking back control of their energy grids, their local energy grids. And being the ever-sensible Germans, they're even having street parties when they've succeeded in doing that. It's quite amazing and quite moving, I think, to see people actually having a street party because they've reclaimed their local electricity grid from a private company. Second one is Moore's law. You will undoubtedly have heard of this one, which is basically that the overall processing power for computers will double every 2 years. The same thing is also beginning to happen with battery technology. We're starting to see the data becoming the new oil with the scale of the insight and analysis. But data alone is not intelligence. It's what we have to do with it and a purpose that sits behind it that's really important. But you're already seeing massive inroads into energy efficiency just by smart analysis. There's a company that I'm involved in called Demand Logic. Essentially, it uses all of the existing building energy management systems. You just plug in their little data box. It analyzes the data more smartly and works out where all the savings can come from. £400,000 worth of savings in 1 year at King's College in London. It's really quite dramatic. So this is smart data based on increased computing power. Plus, we know about the revolutions in data platforms in various different sectors, whether it's Uber in terms of taxis. OVO Energy is doing the same in the UK. They don't actually generate any energy themselves. They're a data platform which is leaning and pushing people towards buying greener energy. And at home, it's going to be transformed as well. Nest is the smart, intelligent thermostat, which you install it, it learns how you behave, it learns what your movements are, and then it probably pays for itself within 3 months and then is deliver savings after that. Apple's HomeKit is going to do something similar. This is part of the Internet of Things, which is going to lead to a radical efficiency and a radical dematerialization of our energy systems. The third law is Swanson's law. And Swanson's law is about the price and cost of photovoltaic energy. And this applies all the way back to the 1970s. But what it says is the price of solar photovoltaic modules tends to drop 20% for every doubling of cumulative shipped volume. Now, to put that simply, it means the price halves every 3 years. And it has done for the last 30 years. And so we are now reaching grid parity in many countries around the world, and even in the UK, not renowned for its massive amounts of sunshine. We're talking about grid parity by 2018. This is a fundamental shift. My mate Mark Stevenson always talks about this. He goes, in the future, we're going to tell people about how we used to do energy, and it's going like, we had to dig this stuff out of the ground, and it was really hard, and dangerous, and people died doing it, and we had to pull it out of the ground, we burnt it in these huge centralized power stations, only 30% efficiency, and then we had to crank up the voltage and send it down wires to people, and then you had to decompress it again down to a voltage that was actually usable, and then if you didn't pay your bill, you got cut off. And people in the future are going to go, it's coming out of the sky. What the hell are you doing? What the hell were you playing at? It's almost like grubbing around in the dirt in a pig pen. It's going to look so primitive in hindsight. And we're seeing it. This Bebox are doing the solar revolution. We're seeing these technology jumps happening all around the world. So in the same way that sub-Saharan Africa never put in landlines for telecommunications, that went straight to mobile technology and cell phone technology, we're seeing the same thing with the solar revolution. Independent units, not an energy grid, but a massively decentralized, community-owned type of program. They're even doing it in my neighborhood in Brixton in South London. Power to, by, and for the people. Crowd-funded, renewable energy systems on social housing in one of the most challenging socioeconomic boroughs in the whole of the UK, owned by the residents who live in those blocks. Young people trained up on how to install them, changing community self-esteem and a belief and a story around what is possible. Of course, we can't talk about energy without talking about Tesla and talking about Elon Musk. Genuine visionary. His mission is to say we won't rest until every vehicle in the world is electric, which is a fairly big goal. I used to work for London Transport, though, and I always used to say, it doesn't matter if we all drive clean, quiet electric vehicles. We'll still be stuck in clean, quiet traffic jams. So I think urban transport is not going to be about cars. But this visionary transition of actually introducing the domestic battery as well, so we can actually store the solar electricity we make off our roofs. All of this is happening. Electric cars probably won't be more important for transport. They'll be more important as batteries. BMW did an experiment with their latest model, the BMW i. They plugged it into the grid. When electricity was expensive, they sold electricity back. And when it was cheap, they charged a car. And they turned the car into a trading system. They made €7,000 in 1 year. So you won't actually be charging your car off your house. You might be charging your house off your car. It'll be the other way around. So electric vehicles might be more important as batteries than as modes of transport. And this is the next big thing, which is happening in South Wales. This is Swansea, where I went to university, studied marine biology all those years ago. This is the schematic for the first UK tidal lagoon. So the Swansea Bay area has one of the highest tidal ranges in the world, and this will fill up at high tide, and then you close the barrier here, and then there's turbines, and you drain it out. So entirely predictable, controllable, renewable energy based on the flow of the tides. And the best thing about this, we can plan around it, because unlike wind, it will be totally controllable. And it's even going to get more sophisticated in terms of batteries. This is a company called StoreDot. They're using a battery chemistry, which is actually inspired by nature, which means you'll be able to charge your phone in 30 seconds. It's rapid realignment of the molecules in the battery, which means it's not a long charging system. You imagine when this technology starts to come to scale, and you could charge your electric vehicle in a minute, rather than having to plug it in for 2 hours. So all of this is in the pipeline, and it's going to get even crazier because we already have GM algae which are pooing diesel, pooing ethanol. I mean, it's not quite commercially at scale yet and commercially viable, but we have algae which are going to poo fossil fuels for us. But they'll be carbon neutral because obviously algae are only pooing out what they've eaten in the first place. If this is not disruptive to the existing energy industry as we currently know it, then it's very, very surprising. I'm also involved with this company, BioBean, in London. They took the 200,000 tons of waste coffee that London generates every year, and they extract a biodiesel from it, which you can put in vehicles, and then you compress the remainder of the coffee into biomass pellets, which you then burn in a biomass boiler. I was telling my brother about this. He goes, I can see the strapline now. Wake up and smell the buses, because the buses will smell of coffee. Or if you're a fan of Apocalypse Now, it's like, I love the smell of buses in the morning. Other crazy stuff. This is mates of mine, Rich and Steve. They used to get drunk, like you guys, last night. They used to have arguments about how they're going to feed the world. And they decided to do something about it. So these guys, being crazy West Country cider drinkers, they got a lease on a disused tube tunnel in South London. This is them down the tunnel. And they've created an underground farm. Renewable energy powered, LED lit, hydroponic farm, 30 meters under the streets of London. They're now in production. They're now selling their produce on Covent Garden Food Market in London. No food miles. It goes from farm to fork in 4 hours. It's literally two miles away. Absolutely extraordinary, amazing freshness, incredible flavors. Now very interested in all sorts of other marginal agriculture potentials in marginal spaces in cities. We can use our ingenuity to solve these types of problems. Plus, we're also going to be able to make anything wherever we want. In the same way that we're not using some of our emerging technologies in the most sophisticated way at the moment. You pass a 3D printer shop and they're just making gonks and strange figurines. The next generation, we're already going to be printing human organs. We have already done an operation where someone who had a congenital throat defect had an MRI scan. They created a 3D model of their throat. They then 3D printed the kind of cast for that and used stem cells to grow a new larynx, a new throat, which has been implanted into someone. So this technology is coming along as well. This means if you can make anything anywhere, what does that mean for global manufacturing and distribution? It's probably going to be a bit disruptive, because you won't need to ship stuff halfway around the world. You'll be able to make it at where it's required. And the final law, Godwin's law, and if you've ever been trolled online, you'll know about this one. Godwin's law, if an online discussion, regardless of topic or scope, goes on long enough, sooner or later someone will compare someone or something to Hitler or the Nazis. And this is the other problem. We need to become more civilized online. I don't know how many of you are on Twitter, but Twitter is just like a shouting match in a drunken bar these days. It's really not very sophisticated. So we need to find better ways of engaging with each other if we're going to realize this new story. Because there's lots of quiet revolutions already going on. Who's got an LED light in their home? It's only about a third. That's interesting. LED technology. 25% of our global energy demand comes from lighting. And we can dramatically scale that back if we do an LED revolution at scale. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And the LED, quality of LED lights now is amazing. They're a bit more expensive to buy up front, but you do make savings on them. Go and LED all your apartments, please. Because we need a different type of leadership. I know you're here talking about education and leadership. There is disruption coming. Every sector is going to be disrupted. You know, there's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And the waves of disruption are like a ripple going out. We've seen some of the obvious businesses disrupted, but whether it's energy, whether it's finance, whether it's food, those waves and ripples of disruption are coming. And it's how we control those ripples or how we make them work for us in a way which is not going to be like this. This is not going to be about the kind of old school style of leadership. Leadership is a collaborative endeavor. You are here practicing your participatory models. You know, your equality and equality of access and opinion is going to be vital because all of our problems are going to be solved, I think, collaboratively if they're solved at all. Because the way we do things really matters. You know, Peter Drucker is a legendary management consultant, said, culture eats strategy for lunch. We can have strategies coming out of our ears, but the culture about the way we do things is going to be as important. It ain't what you do, it ain't just what you do, it's the way that you do it. Because many businesses are still facing this innovator's dilemma. I work with a lot of clients, you know, where we're trying to challenge them. I practice what I call insultancy, which is being strategically rude to clients when I don't think they're kind of doing enough or being clever enough. Because most clients practice a sort of innovation wash. You know, they want to be innovative just enough so they don't really have to change. Because change hurts, and change is scary, and change is difficult. But it's not like you get a choice in this matter. You know, you don't get to decide whether you creatively disrupt your own business model or not. You either do it to yourself or someone else does it to you. You know, the classic example of this is Kodak, because what every business and what every organization has to live now is two things. Sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose had better be bigger than self. Because if you are not serving a purpose that is bigger than self, you are serving only yourself. So what is the role that your company is going to have in the world? What is the difference your business is going to make to wider humanity? It ain't going to be enough. It's not about shareholder value anymore. And a sense of constant innovation. So Kodak's purpose, and we all know the story of Kodak. They invented the digital camera in the 70s, and someone at Kodak said, well, this is a bit of a dangerous threat to our business model. We better not put that out on the market. And of course, you know, it went out on the market, and Kodak has now filed for bankruptcy. If Kodak had lived its purpose, which was about capturing the Kodak moment, you know, the heartfelt moment when it's a family birthday party or a family holiday and you slap that celluloid in the family album. I guess you guys don't even have photo albums these days. This makes me look really old. But if Kodak had lived that purpose and constant innovation, they would have invented Instagram. And they didn't. You know, there's a reason why the banks didn't invent PayPal. There's a reason why EMI Music did not invent Spotify. There's a reason why the Intercontinental Hotel Group did not invent Airbnb. And it's not because they didn't have the ideas. It's because they were afraid. And it was because in organizations, the entrepreneur, the person who tries to do innovation inside a business, gets treated like a virus, gets treated like some kind of cancerous cell that needs to be cut out. Innovation in companies is hard, which is why the disruptors usually come from outside. And they start off as small, innovative, fleet of foot agencies and businesses, which can then rapidly overtake large organizations. They're not all good either. I'm not convinced whether Uber actually works from a sustainability perspective, because I wonder to what extent it just puts more cars on the road, speculatively driving around looking for a ride. I could be wrong, but I've not seen a life cycle analysis which tells me it's saving. Maybe it might in the longer term. Who knows? But the thing is, you can't avoid this change. Who's this? Brezhnev. It's a lovely story about Brezhnev when he was a former leader of the Soviet Union. Brezhnev's on his deathbed. His successor, Andropov, comes to see him. And Brezhnev says, "I'm very worried, comrade." And Andropov says, "What are you worried about, comrade?" And Brezhnev says, "I'm worried that the people won't follow you." And Andropov says, "Don't worry, comrade, the people who don't follow me will follow you." And this is the thing. It's like business can be in denial of this disruption which is coming, but it's coming, whether they like it or not. And all of this leads us up into a position. In Australia, they call this a utility death spiral in energy, whereby all the energy companies used to make all their money at the top end of the market. So when demand was highest, energy prices went up, and that's when all the profit was made. Two things happened in Australia. One, energy efficiency. Two, solar power penetration into the market. Suddenly, that peak demand went down nearly 20%. That killed their profits. Suddenly businesses which are very successful and very large found they were making no money. That's going to happen in lots of different ways in lots of different markets. So 10 years ago, people used to say to Futerra, what should our sustainability strategy be in the context of our business? Now they say, what should our business strategy be in the context of sustainability? What are you going to do for the world? What is the change you are going to make? And it's not going to happen when we adopt new technology. It's still going to be about us. Because, as we've already seen and discussed, it's not about the technology itself. It's how we use it, and it's how we engage with it. And there's lots of examples of where this is already happening. O-Power is very interesting in energy in the States. It's all about behavior change. It's all about using our psychology to change our behaviors in our homes and in our offices. They've delivered billions of dollars worth of energy efficiency savings just by getting people to act in different ways. Because we are going to need new stuff. We are going to need new infrastructure. I don't know what the debates around renewable energy are like where you come from. Certainly in the UK, we have this sort of NIMBY attitude, which is not in my backyard, which is increasingly banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And what we need is yes in my backyard. We need people to embrace this new technology, this new infrastructure. And one of the most profound things that sits at the heart of all of this, and this is about our story, is this idea of the last 50 years of being branded as consumers. This is really important in terms of the framing, because when you frame people as consumers, you make them individualistic, you make them self-interested, you make them selfish, you make them obsessed with their rights, you make them passive, where people sit at the end of a linear industrial pipe, consuming what they're told and what they're given. And what we really need is a return to citizenship, where we are collaborative, we are actively engaged, we are interested in our responsibilities, and we are interested in our collective endeavor. That is actually the way that we're going to stitch the solutions together and find ways to navigate the difficult territory that is coming. And it's got to be driven by dreams. There is nothing, Victor Hugo said, there's nothing but dreams create the future. And we talked about this at Futerra as the sizzle, the excitement, the sound. If you want to sell the sausage, you don't sell the sausage itself. This is borrowed from Elmer Wheeler, a hot dog salesman in 1950s America. He said, if you want to sell the sausage, you sell the sizzle, the sound, the smell, the anticipation of the sausage cooking on the grill. Because if not, you're selling a dead pig. And so much in sustainability, we are selling dead pigs. There's a dead pig, in case you'd forgotten. And this change has already happened. Everyone goes, oh, this is all very well, Ed, but where's this already gone on? Anyone ever heard of Güssing? Have we got any Austrians in the room? Güssing, small town on the Austrian border. 100% renewable. First community in the world to go 100% renewable. They started this process 25 years ago. They had a visionary mayor who said, actually, we're going to make this change. We know where the world is going. We're going to get there first. We're going to become a hotbed of innovation. It can be done. It will be done. It has to be done. Because we are entering this era of sort of top-down and bottom-up. People aren't going to fix this for us. We have to fix it ourselves, and it's going to take interventions. We can't leave it down to the market alone. The market is a little bit flawed. As Amory Lovin said, it makes a good servant, a bad master, and a terrifying God. And also, we were talking about this over dinner last night. Cynicism is obedience. If you're cynical about something, you undermine its potential to happen. We have to be actively positive in the choices we're making to become evangelists and inspirers of the people around us. And I want to finish just by saying something about my experience of going around the world and what I learned from that. So, as Renee said right at the beginning, 7 years ago I went right the way around the world without flying. Kind of a crazy thing to do. You have to hope that the journey is the reward, because you end up back where you started. And I wrote this book, Only Planet, A Flight-Free Adventure Around the World. And what traveling through the world rather than over it taught me was you see this slow transition of landscape, culture, people, language, and cuisine. And it makes you realize that what binds us and what we hold in common is much, much more important and profound than the petty differences that separate us. And astronauts talk about the overview effect. You know, where you get these hard-bitten former military test pilots who go up into space and they see the Earth in all its vulnerable fragility from the upper atmosphere, and they have an epiphany. And they come back and they have this sort of revelation and say, oh my God, everything's connected. You know, you don't realize how stupid all these kind of political and religious differences look from this particular angle. And I think this documentation, the overview effect, I experienced something very similar by going around the world without flying. And one of the most incredible experiences I had was at this place in Angangueo in the Michoacan Mountains in northern Mexico, which is the overwintering ground of these beasties, the monarch butterfly. And the monarch butterfly is the best traveled insect in the world. Every year, every spring, the butterflies fly north from Mexico and they go as far as Canada. And then the following autumn, they return back to this same little patch of pine forest in northern Mexico. Most extraordinary thing is, though, is that the butterflies which return the following year are the 5th generation of the butterflies which left the previous year. They're the great-great-great-grandchildren of the ones that departed. And I think there's something incredible about that as a metaphorical story, because we are embarking on an intergenerational challenge now in dealing with things like climate change, because climate change will not be fixed in your lifetime. It won't be fixed in your children's lifetime. We're going to be dealing with this with generations to come. And so we have to adopt this intergenerational mindset to embrace the uncertainty and the not knowing of where we're actually going to, but knowing that there is a better opportunity and a better world at the end of it. And this is an extraordinary place. You know, you sit there, and as the sun warms up the butterflies, they all take to the air and flutter around your head. And there's an incredible book, actually, by Barbara Kingsolver called Flight Behavior, which is based on this idea of the butterfly migration. There's a great moment in this where one of the climate scientists in the book is being challenged by a skeptical journalist, and his response is fairly devastating. He says, "We're at the top of Niagara Falls in a canoe. We got here by drifting, but we can't turn around for a lazy paddle back when you finally stop pissing around. We've arrived at the point of an audible roar. Does it strike you as a good time to debate the existence of the falls?" And that's kind of where we are. We are debating the existence of the falls as the audible roar builds in the background. And I think this is about an extraordinary emergency. You know, this is an unprecedented challenge. This is something that we've never experienced before. And in this kind of conflating and convoluted series of interconnected, interdependent challenges, whether it's climate change, biodiversity loss, population growth, feeding the world, you know, we have to have an extraordinary emergence of ourselves, about our sense of who we are, about a sense of where we are, and about a sense of what we're going to do about it. And in this context, it's time to get planetary. You know, we have been planetary for 100,000 years, since we first moved and migrated out of Africa to almost colonize every continent on the planet, bar Antarctica. But we haven't been planetary in perspective. We haven't been planetary in consciousness. And if there's one thing we need to do to make education matter, is to become planetary in that sense of consciousness, to realize what connects us, because it should be obvious. American writer David Foster Wallace tells a lovely story about two goldfish swimming along, and they bump into an older goldfish. And the older goldfish says, "All right, boys, how's the water?" Two young goldfish look a bit confused, carry on swimming. One turns around to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" And the point that Foster Wallace is making is that this should be completely obvious to us, that we are all interconnected, that our fates are intertwined, that we are all one, and yet we need reminding of it constantly every single day. What is right here in front of our faces needs to be remembered consciously, not just assumed subconsciously. Because, as I said, when we look at this internet revolution of connectivity, we have the chance to have a planetary narrative which works for all of us. And in that sense, the medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan, the great communications thinker, wrote this in the 60s. And he was talking about TV as being the medium of being the message. It was broadcast. It was one too many. It was all about how you influence people with a one-directional form of communication. Now we are in the era of mass communication, mass connectivity, mass responsibility. And so all of us have to raise the game. All of us have to aspire to those higher notions of what communication can really mean. And it's kind of because we're at that crucial crossroads. You might have noticed I like my film references, but you've all seen The Matrix. It's a bit like when Morpheus says to Neo, do you want to take the red pill or the blue? Or as my mate Giles mischievously said, he goes, why don't you just take both? I'm not sure that's an option. But blue kind of represents continuing to live in the blissful ignorance of illusion, whereas red represents the painful truth of a new reality. This is how we bust out of the denial, by realizing there is a better world that is possible, that we can imagine a better world and that we can also deliver it. And that is going to be our responsibility and our honor and our privilege, because we all need to ask ourselves, and I guess you touched on this yesterday with some of the work from the Presencing Institute, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you genuinely, passionately do if you weren't afraid? We're all afraid of failing. We're all afraid of looking stupid. We're all afraid of making mistakes. We are collectively going to look very foolish if we don't start failing and making more mistakes for the right reasons rather than the wrong reasons as we're currently doing. And I want to finish with this short film, which will only take a second.
Jagging, not sagging, spelling backwards, I'ma leave it at that. That ain't got nothing to do with rap. Get up, just like that. Get up, just like that. Get up, just like that. Get up, just like that.
I know this is a shock.
Screaming gangster 20 years later, of course endorsed while consciousness faded. New generations believe in them fables. Gangsta boogie on 2 turntables. Thank you for letting us be ourselves. So don't mind me if I repeat myself. These simple lines be good for your health. To keep them drum rhymes on the shelf. Live love life like you just don't care. Never scared. Rain and noise is the moment they feared. Get up, still a beautiful idea.
So, the reason I show that, it's obviously a film for the Paralympic Games in London in 2012. None of those athletes got into the position they were in through intention. They all found themselves in difficult, traumatic, indeed tragic circumstances. And yet, they wrote a new narrative for themselves. They wrote a new story. Demonstrated courage, demonstrated innovation to become superhuman. It's our challenge and our call to action is to have that same level of transcendence, to understand the way the world works, to know what needs to be done, and to make it happen. And in that sense, you guys are an incredibly lucky generation because you're born into the turning of the page, where we transform the world, we make it a better place. Thank you.